now it is my pleasure to invite Professor Garratt to share some opening remarks with us. Professor Garratt's bio is in the agenda, which was shared with all of you this morning. However, if you did not receive it, please let us know and we can put it in the chat for you as well. Professor Garratt had served as our opening keynote for our inaugural Governance Week held in 2020, and he encouraged us to host our first global conference. As I mentioned earlier, he is the founder of this international learning network and an absolute inspiration to us here at CCGI. His best-selling book, The Fish Rots from the Head, took the governance world by storm and continues to be relevant even today. So Professor Garratt, we welcome you to take the virtual podium at this time and share some remarks with us.
Thank you, Kamla, and good morning, good afternoon. If Peter was in New Zealand, good evening, everybody. Great to be here. I will say just 4 or 5 minutes worth of speech, and then we'll get on to the proper thing, which is the our main speakers talking on advances in AI, about the climate emergency, and about sustainability. Thank you very much for that little memory of Sally, who passed away a year ago now. I can't quite believe that. Had a bad year, but during that year, I finished my new book. And that is, that's interesting. It's called Breaking the Social Silence on Corporate Governance. And that's a notion of an anthropological notion that people hold secrets in a society which are so deep and so profound and yet so well known that nobody is willing to talk about them. And then they get worse and worse. And so this notion of social silence has been driving me. Actually, that was my original title. And at the end of this little chat, I'll tell you my original title. But I've run into problems with AI on that. So I'll explain that a little bit to lead into the session itself. But right at the moment, I'm very interested in the fact that we're seeing, certainly in most of Europe, certainly in the States, and in some other parts of the world, really a pushback against corporate governance now, quite strongly. And that's worrying to me. In the UK, within the last month, we've had a new code put out, and I'm just bitterly disappointed with it. It really doesn't take us very much further forward on any front whatsoever, except possibly to bureaucratize even more what was going on. The bureaucratization of EDI now being added to ESG and other acronyms is beginning to seriously worry me now. And I've been very public in my criticism of this. So I think in a lot of the West at the moment, corporate governance is flatlining. And so my question is, where do we go from here? And I'm beginning to take it very seriously that unless we actually get together, this is a little axiom I've used in the book, which I'm sure is going to drive everybody mad. I will keep talking about it over the next couple of years. But the little axiom is very simple, that unless we start with enterprise, so enterprise plus environmental impact plus social impact equals effective corporate governance. So enterprise, environmental impact, social impact equals effective corporate governance. And it's the way we need to balance those things out. And it's very, very different from the old notions about the importance of pure finance, bottom lines, etc., etc. That's all given, really. It's enterprise. It's about taking risk. It's about the future dramas of what we do, how we do things that actually will work on our sustainability, will work on our environment, will work on our community development, how those elements become the norm around a boardroom table when taking business decisions. That's the bit that interests me greatly. And so I'm pushing on down that track. The subtitle of the book is the challenge for the next generation of directors. And a lot of the work I've done now over the last 3 or 4 years has been with the younger generation. Some are directors, some are about to become directors. And I find it very interesting that they actually take to this notion of enterprise, of environmental impact, social impact, being quite natural. Yeah, that's what being a director is about. That's what makes it different from being a manager. And it's that bit that that I'm going to press on with in my own work. And I'm actually very, very optimistic that that generation is really beginning to tune in to how important effective corporate governance is in terms of the existential threats to all of us. So I'm actually quite excited about that. I'm also quite excited that as I talk about that, and this is something I've lent on Kamla in the last month or so on, is that perhaps we should set up a separate network which is on smart, small states. Because I think actually a lot of corporate governance is going to not develop with the bureaucratized, more ossified US and European states, but we're actually going to see it coming out of the smaller states who are much more nimble, much more effective by the big pressures, environmental and social pressures on them. And I think we're going to see some interesting things there. So there are some that are already quite smart. John will know this, having come up from Singapore. But Singapore, Switzerland, to an extent now, the way Ireland is developing, are very interesting. But there are many other small states that are now beginning to look at how are we going to exist in this very different world. And I'm very optimistic, very excited by that. And I'm hoping that CCGI will very much develop a way of getting some small states together to talk about how they're going to develop this. I'll round off by being a bit rude about AI at the moment, as I'm on the receiving end in 3 ways. I'm sure it's a wonderful idea. I don't think it's a very new idea, but everybody's telling me it's absolutely amazing and that we should do that totally unethical thing of move fast and break things, which is nonsense. But that's what seems to be happening at the moment. The original title of my book was a quote from Portia in The Merchant of Venice. And it was just shining a light on a naughty world. And to my horror, about a month ago, my publisher came back and said, "We can't use the title, Bob." I said, "Well, it's a very famous quote. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's Shakespeare." And he said, "Yes, but unfortunately, US algorithm writers are not very well educated. They're also rather dim." And he said, "Your quote, especially the naughty bit, is coming up as either actual or potential pornography." I mean, that's mind-boggling. That's I was horrified, but it turns out to be true, and I've run it with a lot of people now, and they all think it's a great title, but it's being blocked on some sites already as potential or actual pornography, which is a mind-boggling thought. Second, I'm very worried about AI because this move fast and break things is also a way of ripping off, and I think it's criminal, people's intellectual property. And this notion of having massive learning systems, which, when I use their words here, which scrape the intellectual property of the world and then compile it without paying any attention to morally or financially to the intellectual property is, I think, extremely worrying indeed. But on the other hand, I had a good laugh this week when a couple of the big companies had to put out massive apologies because they had taken the notion of the importance now of diversity as being more than just words, but diversity had to be shown in pictures. And again, algorithm writers don't seem to be very bright, or perhaps they're the ones that sit at home with their mothers in bunching burgers in the middle of the night. And they just don't think through what's going on. They don't have much common sense. So we had some glorious examples this very week of diversity being applied to all sorts of pictures. And so we had some very black Nazis. We had some very Chinese Icelanders and some other weird examples that were coming up, which were just complete and utter nonsense. But it shows that if you just let your algorithms run and you don't monitor them very well, and you don't actually think through, is this common sense, what we're doing, then you can get into serious trouble. And these have got into very serious trouble this week. So on that cheery note, I'm going to hand over to Camille, who I know will actually facilitate us extremely well during this afternoon. I look forward to it hugely. Camille, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Garratt. And as usual, you make us think. You bring your unique perspectives and you just blow the issues wide open. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, good whatever, wherever you are. I'm Camille Facey, and I am a director of CCGI, and we are delighted to have you all joining us for our International Learning Network conversation this afternoon. The topic, advances in AI, the climate emergency, and sustainability. Kamla, you couldn't have tried to get it any wider, could you? I mean, each one is a huge topic in and of itself. And we just heard from Prof Garratt, and I really like that idea about smart small states. And then the formula, enterprises, environmental impact, and social impact equal corporate governance. In the Caribbean, we are small states. In the Caribbean, we are on the verge. We are already, let me not misspeak, contending with climate change. We had some wind and waves about a week ago in Jamaica that took out restaurants, etc., along the shoreline. It was like a mini hurricane in February. This does not happen in February in Jamaica. This may happen when you have a hurricane in August. The Paris Agreement talks about 1.5 degrees. But we are being told that based on the trajectory that we're now on, we're headed for 2.4. There are our Caribbean scientists, climate scientists, who say that if the temperature exceeds 1.5, Caribbean states have half a chance of a livable future. Half a chance of a livable future. And we are doing very little, unlike perhaps places like Singapore and Switzerland, and I think New Zealand, to prepare our Caribbean states for what could come. Are we going to be climate refugees? I mean, these are issues that we really have to begin to talk about and to contend with. So the climate emergency that Kamla has so nicely titled part of today's discussion is real for us in the Caribbean. And we can't simply say, oh, it's somebody else's problem. It is our problem. Advances in AI. I mean, our businesses need to understand what is happening in that regard. Because as we are not paying attention to it, our staff, members and teams, they are actually utilizing this What company information is being put out there to then be read and put into something else? What are our policies? How are we going to deal with that? In relation to sustainability, IFRS has issued sustainability standards. Are we aware of these new standards, just like how we have the accounting standards? Our job as directors and as leaders in our enterprises is to keep informed about what is happening, to keep informed about the developments so that we can help to chart the way forward for our enterprises. If we don't do that, we won't have sustainable businesses. If we don't pay attention, we won't have sustainable nations. So I am really happy this morning that we have these experts from across the world who are here to share with us. And thanks to Prof and Kamala, I mean, we are privileged to have persons from all spheres and all nations who they managed to convince to come and speak with us in the Caribbean so we can have the knowledge we need to help to direct our businesses. So today we have Dr. Peter Crow, and I'm going to just introduce everybody now so that we can go from one panelist straight to the next. You have the bios, but we're still going to talk a little bit about who each person is, because sometimes, of course, we don't do the reading. We should. So Dr. Peter Crow, he is an independent board director, advisor, and educator with deep expertise in corporate governance, strategy, and the craft of board work. And he has an extensive track record helping boards realize their organizational potential. His sector knowledge extends across agribusiness, technology, and innovation, professional services, local government, manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, you can use the little clap emoji to welcome Dr. Crow. After him, I'm going to ask Dr. Dionne Chamberlain. Yes, I'm just going to introduce everybody, Peter, so that
do it.
after this, yeah, we can flow smoothly. So on our screen now, you will see Dr. Dionne Chamberlain Miranda, and she is the managing director and partner in a successful bilingual consulting regional firm known as Chamberlain Consulting Limited, which is located in Belize, Central America. And this firm operates on a social entrepreneurship basis. In her volunteer capacity, she is the chairman of the Belize Coalition of Service Providers. She holds a PhD in business administration and a master's degree in global management from Phoenix University. Let us welcome Dr. Chamberlain. And then from the Gulf states, John Gollifer, who joined the GCC Board Directors Institute as CEO on the 15th of November, 2023. Prior to that, he served as the General Manager of the Middle East Investor Relations Association from January 2019 until November 2023. In that role, he oversaw the development of a prominent professional body for investor relations in the Middle East. Before joining MIRA, John led the UK's IR Society from 2012 to 2018, earning an honorary fellowship for his contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so privileged to have these two gentlemen and this lady here with us this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Peter to share with us from his hotel room. And Peter, we are seeing you clearly and we are hearing you clearly. So over to you, Dr. Crow.
Wonderful, Camille. Hey, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to the GCC for pulling together John and coming across all of this. It's, we're talking about small states. I think New Zealand's a small state with 5 million people. and we supposedly bat above our weight. And then I look at what's happening in the Caribbean, I'm going, wow. But with modern technology, here we are. I am on the iPad. So I'm in the vertical presentation, but I don't want you to necessarily think that this is on the straight and narrow, because what I've chosen to do in the next few minutes is offer some comments that might be a little bit controversial. And I'm not trying intentionally to be controversial, but more so, we've got 3 topics here in relation to artificial intelligence, climate sustainability, that these topics are themselves wicked problems. They're very, very easy to describe, very, very difficult to resolve, because they're not straightforward technical. We've got ethics in here, we've got morals, we've got different cultures around the world, we've got this rapid advancement of technology, and in relation to climate, we've got some people who completely deny there's change going on, other people who claim strongly. And then on another dimension with climate, not only is there the situation that it's changing, but there are some who think we can control the climate and others who think we cannot. Now, those dimensions immediately place us in a situation of quite some uncertainty. So what I'd like to do over these few minutes is major in on something that I've been involved in since I was a little bit younger. Those of you who cast your mind back to 1984. And yes, George Orwell entitled his book, but in 1984, I was finishing my first degree. It was a technology degree, software engineering, manufacturing, production systems, and management leadership. And I had the opportunity in that final year, 1984, to do an artificial intelligence paper because I had an elective and I thought it might be quite interesting to have a look at this thing. So I've had a long journey with this thing called artificial intelligence right through to today. And with my interests in technology, you'd think I'd know a little bit about it. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on this topic or the other 2, but what I am claiming is to be able to offer some questions and some comments so that we together can ponder the situation. So let's start with AI. It's not new, but what I would like to do, though, is try and to define some terminology, and this is something that I do often, because as I move through this world called corporate governance, through boards of directors, there's 3 questions that I get asked most commonly, and I'd like to share these questions with you. They may surprise you, and I make no apology for sharing them because it creates the platform to then put down some definitions. The first is, what is corporate governance? The second, how should it be practiced? And the third, what is the role of the board? You know, we talk about best practice all the time as if there's one best way of doing it. And that'd be fine if the board had no people in it. But of course, it's full of people. And so with that, some terminology. And the first one I want to introduce is, I want to break it down. Artificial and intelligence. So let's just start with intelligence per se. And this is that ability, I'd suggest, to adapt to new circumstances, to learn, to acquire new skills and knowledge. And the comparison here is instinct. You know, instinctive behaviors, but it's that ability to learn, to acquire new skills and knowledge. Why? So that we can make decisions about what we might do in the future. So it's about learning from that experience, handling abstract ideas, and using that skill and knowledge to manipulate situations or the environment. So I'm going to suggest to you that could be a working definition of intelligence, and that would distinguish different species on the planet. Now, if we prepend this word artificial to it, what happens? Well, the dictionary, and I have looked, and this has been remarkably consistent since the phrase was first coined, but artificial intelligence introduces the notion of machines. It's as simple as that. That it's this ability for the machine to perform tasks normally associated with humans, intelligent beings. So it's that simulation of intelligence by machines. You say, well, that sounds reasonable. And if you'll allow me, here's my pencil. I've been taking some notes as we've been listening. I place my pencil on the desk here in the hotel room. A camera-equipped artificial intelligence device could easily recognize there's a pencil there. But one of the things it can't do is explain why it was there or how it got there or anything like that, because with artificial intelligence, there's no sentient type behavior, there's no reasoning as such. Now, this might change over time, but with respect to artificial intelligence, we've got a whole lot of early use cases around personalized learning, virtual assistants, automated stock trading, fraud detection, customer service, even autonomous vehicles. And we know with our iPads and our phones and others, we've got facial and speech recognition as well. And my wife's a medical doctor, so medical diagnosis, they can take pictures of skin and other bodily conditions, and the computer can match it up against many prior examples, and it can narrow down the possibility. And as humans, we like to think of that as intelligence. What I'd like to suggest to you is that it's simply pattern matching. We're thinking about the next word. We're thinking about a similar picture. And if we hold that as a possibility, then we've got to ask ourselves whether it's strategic or whether it's some other sort of enabler. So some more terminology here. Weak AI, or that's what ChatGPT and Alexa and quality control does. That's that notion of a trained and focused machine to perform some specific and specified tasks. But when we talk about AI in the general public, more often we're talking about what some people call strong AI or artificial general intelligence. And this is that ability of a machine to match the human intellect in the way that in 2001 A Space Odyssey, HAL, the computer could do that. And it's very difficult to distinguish between them. Now, all of that to say there's some definitions. There's a massive hype cycle. There's myths and realities all over the place with this at the moment. And for boards and directors, the challenge is very straightforward, to try and make sense of it all. So on the myth side, you've got people saying at the moment that artificial intelligence replicates human intelligence and emotion. That there'll be profound societal change. That these tools are decisive and are knowledgeable, and that the machines will take over, and there are step changes ahead for boards. So that's what people say. I hear that, I read that, I've been partying fora around the world, and in fact, just at lunchtime today, there were conversations that included those types of statements. But I'd like to just pose back, and we push back on some of it over the meal today, a reality where, the machine's not sentient. They're giving answers, but not necessarily solutions. They're a large language model, but where these tools are very, very helpful, and they are tools, is they can take care of routine tasks. They can automate repeatable things for us, Like boards, they struggle with ambiguity. And so there's some interesting reality pieces in there. So for boards, what I'd like to suggest is that the promise is around step change, even to the possibility of doing away with boards. But I think the reality is we've got a critically important enabler here that can make sense of seemingly disparate information and put that in front of directors so they can make more informed decisions. So AI is a strategic enabler. And the trend line is that that's moving pretty quickly indeed. And so our challenge as boards in the near and medium term, so I'm thinking 12 to 36 months, is we need to get really, really good at asking questions. So in relation to AI, are we monitoring and assessing the signals and trends? Are we across this stuff? Or are we waiting for management and others to bring information to us? We can't afford to be passive. Governance is about guiding and steering, after all, active contributions. Are we attuned to what our stakeholders expect? Or do we just think we're attuned? Have we gone and asked them? What do people think about a computer doing some of this for us? We should have no problem because we're using artificial intelligence or AI-enabled technology pretty much on a daily basis anyway. Have we got enough time in our boardrooms set aside for strategizing and scenario planning? And once we do down select and make some choices about how we're going to proceed, are we convinced that we've got enough resources allocated, and those resources are allocated so that the desired outcome can be achieved? You might say, well, that sounds pretty boring, Peter Crow. I'm going to agree with you. It probably is, because what we're staring at here, I would suggest, is the possibility of a really productive, powerful productivity tool to help us make more informed decisions. And we've heard from Prof Garratt. He didn't use the language, but I was thinking from a comment I heard him make in my hearing yesterday, corporate governance is run aground. And I think that's probably right. We need to re-energize and re-envision what we're doing here. We don't need to redefine corporate governance. We've got the 7 duties in law. That's all fine. What we need to do is learn how to practice. And we've got young people coming through, and I love that next generation comment, Bob. And we need to give them the confidence to be far more inquiring than we have been. So that's AI. I wanted to make, and that's the bulk of my comment. In relation to climate emergency, we've got lots going on. We've got the Europeans taking a regulated route. We've got in New Zealand, some parts of the country are eroding into the sea. New Zealand, if you don't know, sits on the border between 2 tectonic plates, so some of it's going into the sea anyway. And 82%, yes, 82% of our export receipts come from the land. So we're a food and fibre country. That's how we make money. That's how we survive. And so we need to be smart about our use of water. We need to be smart about our use of land and soil. And I grew up with this stuff as a dairy farmer's son and grandson. My father used to say, when I asked him, why don't we milk more cows, Dad? And he'd say, well, we could do that. But that would mean more work to have more grass. We could push the girls harder. We could fertilise the ground more. And they'd produce more milk and we'd get more income. But there's only 2 problems with that, he would say. The first is that we would carry more expense to get more milk. The second, and this might sound a little bit, I don't know, unusual for some of you, But if you push the animals hard in 1 year, don't expect them to get pregnant next year. And continue to be productive. So this notion of climate for me and this notion of sustainability are so interwoven, and I just wanted to bring these two together, that they are interdependent. The sustainability call is hot. We've had ESG now as a term since it was first coined by Paul Clements Hunt in 2005. Generally speaking, I will not use the term publicly anymore because it's been weaponized, it's become politicized, and we've got tick boxes all over the place that we're ESG this or ratings that, and we've got firms around the world who are attempting to make lots of money by saying do this, do that. I think boards need to get above all of that and say, well, we need to make decisions today that are in the best interest of the company and our stakeholders, and to leave open as many options as we can in the future. And if we can achieve that tension, and it is a tension, then we can say that we're moving towards some sort of sustainable future. That's at a company level. But then we lift it up to a market level, it becomes an order of magnitude more difficult. And then right out to societal level, man, you've got a big challenge on your hands. So I wanted, in these few minutes that I've had, and thank you for your indulgence, more so on AI than the other two, but you've got some speakers coming that are going to contribute really well in those areas. We need boards to be far more awake than they have been. We need boards to take much more seriously the need to read, to ask questions, to probe. The notion of 1 week per board per month is laughed at in some quarters. I think rapidly we're going to see that it may not be enough because things are changing so rapidly. There's so much complexity. And I hope with those comments that it's given you something to think about, and I'm happy to take questions when we go into the forum later on. Thanks very much, Camille.
Peter, that was an earful.
I know, sorry.
The VUCA environment, volatility and uncertainty. Yeah, and that's what we are all living through. And the reality is that as board members, you're kind of sitting there and you're almost paralyzed by all the things that are coming at you. And what ought you really to be doing? So let us know. Go to Dionne to see if she can provide us with her thoughts before we come back later to the questions that we will ask of Peter, because he has opened so many issues that we need to discuss and explore further. So Dr. Chamberlain, I'm handing over to you.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I believe that what he brought to us, what Dr. Peter Crow brought to us is the reality of where it is that we really need to be looking at right now. And what Professor Barratt started out, I love that formula that he used. And the formula is enterprise, risk, and return, plus environmental impact, plus social impact equals effective corporate governance. And from what Dr. Crow mentioned just now, it is not only boards that need to consider their role even further, but I believe that it needs to trickle to CEOs, C-suites, management, and at all different levels, because whatever is not inspected can never be expected. So as he brought about the concept of VUCA for all of us just now, he also led into the new wave, which is BANI, and BANI, B-A-N-I, is where our volatility is leading us to being brittle, and anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible because it's really going all over the place at this point. And we really need to sit down and understand where all of this fits in, where it ties in, and what can we do as boards, as people, and as citizenry of countries at the end of the day. There is a McKinsey report about the organization of the future enabled by Gen AI. And what they're saying is that it is driven by people. And we have to really understand that it is advancing rapidly in the business world, and it promises significant impact over the next decade. But as Dr. Peter Crow mentioned, we have to have those moral and those ethical considerations, because AI is really looking at manipulating the data that is put into it. And if the data is filled with lack of ethics, lack of clarity, and much bias, then the data that comes out will also be filled with that. So we have to look at AI as being accessible by not just those with formal or technical knowledge, but AI accessible by anyone. And the McKinsey research suggests that Gen AI could automate up to 70% of business activities by 2030, adding trillions of dollars to the global economy. Now that brings it around fair of job loss, but we also have to look at job replacement, job substitution, and the brain behind the machines at the end of the day, which is realistically human. Again, Gen AI is likely to automate various tasks affecting workers across wage rates, educational backgrounds, and it could even affect professions traditionally requiring higher education, such as educators, lawyers, researchers. My son is doing genetics and biotechnology, but a lot of what they are doing is using AI. And so the amount of lab work is shifting on the ground, but it also means that we will have solutions for problems affecting the world and its people much faster. So leaders across the world honestly need to look at being advocates. However, to stay competitive, we must demystify Gen AI, identifying its high use impact cases, commit to building the necessary skills and capabilities, and looking at its integration into the law so that we ensure that the moral and ethical fiber is not compromised. For those who are really willing, AI can help companies level the playing field. I believe that the greatest challenges related with sustainability are twofold. On the one hand, we must apply measures to mitigate and adapt to global warming that will also minimize its impact on the most vulnerable. On the other hand, new socioeconomic and production models have to be defined that will improve our relationship with natural ecosystems and provide a solid but fair social base for the future. Like Professor Garratt said, we need socioeconomic and production models that will improve our relationship with the natural ecosystems. And now there are a few companies that develop indicators and specific strategies to evaluate their impact on nature. Everybody and every country attends COP28, but what are we returning to do at the end of the day is really important, because there is a contrast between the narrative and practice results in growing levels of greenwashing on the part of many companies as they seek to position their products, as consumers' knowledge of sustainability increases, and companies adopt solid commitments. There are few opportunities for mass communication that is not very clear on the subject of sustainability. Moreover, legislative initiatives needs to be implemented to ensure that large companies are subject to greater accountability in their non-financial information reports. In small Caribbean states like mine, which when I say small, I mean 500,000 less people, in our non-financial information reports, environmental monitoring is costly and in most cases is not being enforced because governments cannot afford it. I want to explore and share some live cases today where two companies and one industry that I'm aware of because I know them intimately are taking the kind of action that is needed. They are simple in application, yet groundbreaking in the shifts needed today, as per Professor Barrett's formula in dealing with this poly crisis. The first is the LSG group, ICA, which is called Artificial Intelligence for Consumption Analytics, was the consultancy that they took on. What they decided to do was to combine computer vision, artificial intelligence, and data analytics with their broad airline catering experience. Simply put, they took pictures of inbound trays on flights. They used the images to analyze with the help of AI to determine what passengers leave behind and which meals and components are most favored by customers. Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with the environment? But airlines can get detailed insight about passengers' consumption behavior in order to make more educated decisions about future catering offerings. What they did with this study was that they were able to gain the insight of consumption. They were able to make decisions on processes to deal and meet passengers' expectation. But most of all, they were able to reduce waste, weight, CO2, and costs, while increasing passenger experience. So remember, with AI, photographs taken of the trays before the person ate, after the person ate, the garbage going into the garbage can, resulting in reduced food waste, enhanced cost for efficiency, increased customer satisfaction. And this is a simple application which created the insights that they needed to be able to deliver better to the public. Now, I want you to understand that it might sound very simple, but on a consumption perspective, only 41% of the meals were consumed. On 34% were partly eaten, and 34% were not eaten at all. By getting this analytic and using AI, this company was able to identify that they were wasting 4.3 tons of food within that first year that they did the analysis, which evolved into millions of dollars of savings, and at the end of the day, lessening the CO2 emissions. Now I'd like to look at a different company now. It's known as Notco Company. And what Notco wanted to do was create a simple algorithm that could learn how to combine an infinite combination of plants to replicate the flavor, the texture of animal products without compromising on taste, feel, or function. Now, they use these artificial intelligence algorithms, and they created these food structures that would create milk, beef, chicken at the chemical, molecular, physical, and nutritional level that was equal. Now, this is all very important because I want us to realize that more plant-based options can lessen the environmental impact without sacrificing on taste and eating experience. And it is a worldwide phenomenon with those of us who have taken on this different way of eating and consumption to help make our contribution. Taking animals out of the equation eliminates the negative environmental side effects that comes with them. The cultivation of vegetables uses a smaller quantity of water and generates a smaller quantity of CO2 than livestock. And these can also be taken into our small island states and small countries in the way that we produce the vegetables within our environments. The cultivation of plants requires lower energy consumption, another main factor when considering CO2 emissions. Water consumption decreases and the carbon footprint of livestock dwindles. Remember, the space required to grow the crops is a lot smaller. Now, on another environment, which I've explored locally, is the insurance industry, where AI and machine learning models are becoming more widely used in climate prediction and disaster preparedness to aid experts without replacing them. As more and more industry uses case studies for AI and machine learning comes to fruition, weather and climate experts are utilizing these technologies to assist, but not to replace human intelligence. It is absolutely important for us to understand that the predictive qualities not inhibited by human errors are a part of the AI environment and create the new workflows to improve the business outcomes. I spoke with Andrew Rowe of RF&G Belize Insurance Company, and he explained that these models are being used alongside or as alternatives to large physics-based weather and climate models and offer some really compelling advantages. What they are seeing is that it can help with disaster preparedness, so it can help us to evacuate when we need to, how fast we need to. Aerial imagery technology and location data company combines satellite imagery from as far back as 2014 And these technologies create predictive insights like levels of tree cover in proximity to buildings that could result in increased vulnerabilities caused by fire spread, fallen trees. And what is even better than all of that is where our utility companies can actually model and identify how fast they can actually restore services in terms of any of these impacts that occur. So I want to talk to you today about 10 actions that we know that due to climate change outcomes, that many companies are and will be in the future greatly affected in many different ways. So what are 10 things that we can do to do our part? And the first is to measure and analyze greenhouse gas emissions in countries that are evolved that can do that. At the end of the day, we really need to look at how our footprint is and how we are measuring our CO2 emissions. Once we understand that, then we can find solutions as to how to limit that even further, just like in the case of that food company evaluating wastage within that environment. Another one is reducing energy consumption, simply turning off lights, air conditioning units, heatings when we don't actually need it. Using simple drying mechanisms like what is used in the UK rather than dryers that we use to dry our clothes. Giving renewable energies a go. This is absolutely important where we look at solutions. I'm excited to see within our local communities where we're putting into place a lot of solar technology, where we're seeing very slow but interested trickling within our governments, bringing in electric buses and few electric cars and setting up the infrastructure to be able to support them in the future. Reducing waste and fight obsolescence. Again, a lot of paper waste is produced within our environment, especially within governments and companies expecting the triplicate signatures and paperwork. There's a lot of industrial waste that we're producing. And simply put, we can look at avoiding disposable cups, stirrers, capsules for the coffee machine. There are so many ways to repurpose kitchen crockery instead of using disposables. Reducing the number of prints, reusing papers as drafts. And one of the things that we also don't realize, that even the mass sending of emails around the world, and it impacts our servers, and it actually impacts our CO2 emissions as well. So we can say that we're paperless, but again, we have to look at our CO2 emissions in its entirety. So it's important to use equipment and devices properly, to avoid the deterioration faster, and to repair gadgets when they break down, instead of this disposable methodology that we have where we replace everything as soon as they're broken. Again, we can look at optimizing our employees' transportation, carpooling, trying to make sure that they live closer to work so we cut down on the CO2 emissions and therefore impact on climate change. Looking at greener infrastructures and equipment, making incentives for these within our local environments for the use of bulbs, renovating employees' cars, environmental laptops, screens, bulbs, office materials, anything that we can use. Using the ethical standards of reuse and repurpose and recycle, and getting seriously into that, and really training and educating our populace to contribute as well. Because as governments try to do it on their scale, if the local populace is not educated to start making these simple shifts and changes, then we will not have the critical mass needed to really impact the climate as we need to. Another thing that is really important is, as we are trying to be sustainable, that we start to use sustainable suppliers. Each of us has a decision to make. And although we may be looking at the cheaper solution when choosing suppliers, partners, vendors, it is important to make that ethical and that moral decision in making good environmental practice and supporting those who support what we believe in, what we think is good for this environment. What is absolutely important is raising awareness among our employees, clients, and other stakeholders. In Belize, I'm so proud of Hamanasi and the Lodge at Chalk Creek. Both of them are resorts renowned for their green initiatives, and they ensure that they are turning their communities around, not only the resort, but the entire community, understanding why we need to contribute and why we need to do better. As an economic agent, we have to play a role in raising that awareness in our employees, in our consumers, in media, and in other stakeholders. Having in-house contests, hackathons, campaigns to raise awareness, partnering with outside organizations. And that is why I applaud the Green Globe Awards that really encourage our resorts, our partners to become involved, because they see the value, and it creates that snowball effect where we can reproduce it in our homes and transmit it to our friends and create the critical mass that will actually drive this in the end of the day. We need to promote environmental friendly ways of working. And I love the fact that the CCGI understands that we can do this online and that telecommuting can work. And there are many advantages to be able to bring all of us at this table where we can have this conversation and cut down on the CO2 emissions. I wish that after every meeting like this, we could actually tally and send out a report of what we saved the earth by doing it in the way that we do it. I believe that only when it is inspected can it be expected, and only when it is monitored and captured, so that we can see what we've done and what we've saved and the impact we make with every single tiny initiative that we'll do. Because remember, as human beings, we want to feel that we're contributing. We want to feel like, what have I done, and what is the stick that will guide and guard me on that and tell me how much have I done. And so I encourage all of you in your meetings, as you work on all of these different initiatives, tally up and tell the world what you're doing. Because as JFK said, what is the use of doing good work if nobody knows about it? And sometimes we need to get that out and rah, rah, rah about ourselves. But we need to mobilize for the climate change challenge. The role of companies is political. Remember, we have to drive and advocate for what it is that we're looking, by pushing our politicians or public actors to act on global warming, not just talk about it, not just show up and take the glorified photo together, saying what they've done and what we're agreeing to. Because every time we go back, we will be going back and saying that we're in still the same position or in a negative position. Artificial intelligence is now inescapable. It is a subject discussed around the globe, and its growth has been met with both excitement and concern, like Dr. Crow brought up to us. And it's important that we realize that, and we don't just phase over it or pretend that it's all good. The technology has the potential, for example, to solve complex problems in the context of combating global climate change. It can expedite technological advances, speed the development of new and more sustainable materials. It can improve energy efficiency. It can inform disaster response and forecast environmental processes like erosion, landslides, and weather patterns. So we need to ensure that we use it for what it is valuable for, and ensure that it is not violated and used in how it can actually affect us as human beings. But we also have to realize that there's also the two sides of the coin. And that is where we need to place our collective efforts, on the advocacy, on the legislation, and making sure that it doesn't affect us. Remember, as the McKinsey studies also state, CEOs have to embrace AI because productivity jumps. 48% of CEOs look at the way that AI will improve their productivity, how it creates modernization that we need for this world to be able to move. It creates that competitive advantage based on the advanced generative AI. And there are concerns on data security, on bias, data accuracy, ethics, morals, values. However, we can see the impact that it has positively, and we need to look at that in where it does. And we have to ensure that it leads to the workforce changes that we need, and that we are able to reduce, redeploy, and train the workforce in the areas that we will need them. Cybersecurity is one of the largest areas that is opening up, and we do not have the manpower to support that. So as we move on, we realize that there's a lot of potential financial benefits, but there could be financial losses, as Dr. Peter Crow mentioned, and we have to be serious about how we handle that. In conclusion, These advances do not come without risk. AI may contribute to job displacement across several industries. It may exacerbate resource and energy use and increase the circulation of misinformation and bias. For these reasons, it is essential that AI is regulated in an ethical and responsible manner to ensure the safety and protection of public interest. We're entering an era where we have to do better and more with less. If AI can be solved responsibly, it can be used to help in solving a host of society's problems and concerns. It is being used increasingly in both the private sector and governmental programs that aim to have it be a force for public good. What gives me hope and optimism for AI then is its potentially greater capacity to help solve the complex policy problems that are becoming exceedingly difficult. Technology won't be the only answer, but it is important to improve the information basis for decision making. But to use AI well and to regulate it well also requires that we as humans recognize that regulatory excellence is often people excellence. In other words, we need people, we need you to use these AI tools wisely and well, since they won't work on their own to promote public good. The usefulness of AI requires a creative spark from real people to identify areas where this technology can be used most effectively, and then to design it with care and attentiveness. Those who have raised alarms about AI and its dangers ought to be applauded, and their concerns need to be heeded. We need to proceed with management systems and auditing processes designed to monitor for problems that arise and then fix them. Thank you very much.
Dionne, that was amazing. Things are clearly happening in Belize that the rest of us in the Caribbean need to be far more aware of. Peter asked us questions, told us what we needed to think about, but you have just given us a lot of answers and areas in which we across the Caribbean can focus. You're an attorney, correct?
No, I'm not. I did do a bit of law, but I'm a PhD in business administration.
Okay, I was just about to claim you because your intellectual property, this is being recorded, and we're going to go through everything that you just gave us on your list because we need to come up with the Caribbean solution. And I just heard it from you. And if we can all make the connections, because when Peter talked about what his father told him about the need to run the business in a sustainable way so that the business could continue, so that the cows the next year would be able to give milk and produce calves. But as Mervyn King said, the greatest challenge very often to governance is greed. And so linking the progress, what we call progress sometimes, what our businesses look for in making that extra dollar to the not counting the impact of it is something that as boards, we're now really going to have to look at Prof Garratt's formula, enterprise equaling, I'm looking for where I wrote it down, but that amazing little enterprise plus environmental impact plus social impact equals corporate governance. You were just describing that for us in your speech, Dionne, in terms of just the very practical solutions, like using the crockery instead of the disposables. And I must say, American Airlines seems to have got this message long ago when they stopped giving us all meals on flights. Because, I mean, they've stopped. So they can claim that, oh, all of it was being wasted and, how much CO2 they're saving. So your presentation was just so insightful. And we are now going to, thank you very much. We're going to give you a clap and come back with our questions later. And we are now going to kick this ball to John, for John to share with us what the Gulf states, also small states, what are you thinking in your neck of the woods? What do you have to share with us to add to this conversation?
Well, thank you, Camille. And I must say, I think, audience, you've had the main course, not once, but twice. So consider me as the digestive. I'd like to thank Professor Garratt for inviting me to this International Learning Network, and also, of course, to Kamla and the team at CCGI for bringing us all together. And perhaps I just start from a personal point of view. I mean, many of you won't know, but I'm sure it's why Kamla heard from Professor Garratt. Oh, maybe invite John, because my mum's from Guyana. I last visited Guyana in 2018. And since that time, of course, Guyana has been one of the fastest growing economies in the world on the back of its oil production. And here I now sit in the lowest cost producers of oil and gas in the Middle East. And with everything happening around us, it's quite easy to become quite agnostic as you sit in the Middle East and you realize that you're right in the center of gravity, whether it's from north to south or whether it's from east to west. And with so many geopolitical happenings, as we were initially discussing before we all got into this event proper, I think it's quite reflective to think on where we are, what we see, what we believe, what other people say, and what you're led to believe. And as I sort of said, the only way to understand is to actually come and visit. I know we have to be online, but there's nothing quite like being in person and, of course, being on the ground. And that's exactly what's happened to me over the last 5-6 years. I've been based in the Middle East. And I think in terms of geopolitics, I describe the views from the Middle East as very agnostic to the West, of course, which I'd sort of consider myself from. But in many ways, I'd also consider myself coming from the global South and aspiring to see the global South find its place at the table and do what it can do. And I think it's no coincidence in thinking about what Kamla asked me to address, which was simply the climate emergency and sustainability part, as opposed to anything else. So that's what I'll focus on, because I think it's no coincidence that the UN Conference of Parties, both 27 in Egypt, and of course, at the end of last year, COP28 took place in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Excuse me for a second, I've got a frog in the throat. So in terms of the COPs, we actually participated as the GCC Board Directors Institute with a number of our partners, large corporates. And it was fascinating because you read a lot about the various COPs, you read a lot about what happens and what doesn't happen. But to be able to be on the ground, as I put it, in a part of the world where through natural resources, they're really able to put their money where their mouth is and to consider what is happening around the world and to consider what changes can be made from the Middle East. It was really quite inspiring. And the event was held in Dubai. We participated in a number of discussions. And I think just from a heartening point of view, to see the leadership, to see the approach taken by the Middle Eastern countries was really, really quite something to be part of. And thinking of more vulnerable countries, as was outlined at the beginning of this discussion, I think the agreements on loss and damage from climate change, particularly thinking of more vulnerable countries and putting it from the point of view of the richer or better resource countries, including from the Middle East, in trying to fund national response plans where those plans are clearly needed. And of course, closer to home for us would, of course, be the Indian Ocean as opposed to the Caribbean. But just thinking of the analogy of Guyana, an oil-producing country, being able to do similar things possibly in your part of the world. And of course, while it's easy to make climate finance pledges, which have been made at all the various COPs. I think, again, thinking of United Arab Emirates, the host in particular, putting their money where their mouth is as far as the funding of such climate finance pledges was very, very clear. If I just take it down to the corporate level, as I mentioned, I was on panel discussions with a number of our partners. One of the ones that stood out to me was what's happening in the peninsula. Before we all joined, I was just describing the geography of the Arabian Peninsula, which if you look on a map is actually huge. And it's easy to sort of lump the Middle East all together and think, it's all one place. It isn't. It's many, many places, some of which are small, like some of the places that you come from, as you were mentioning. And some of the economies, of course, are much larger. But on the eastern side, you have the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, as we call it here. I made the mistake when I first arrived of calling it the Persian Gulf. That's the view from the other side of the Gulf, and clearly not a thing that I should repeat, being based on the Arabian Peninsula. So it's the Arabian Gulf as far as we're concerned. And then interesting enough, on the other side of the peninsula is the famous Red Sea. So that transit point for goods coming from east to west and vice versa through the Suez Canal. And one of the companies that I was on a panel with is called the Red Sea Global Development Company. And they shared with us at COP28 a very interesting approach to adaptation and ecosystem restoration. One of the features that stood out to me is you'll know that this part of the world can have temperatures of up to 50 degrees centigrade. So I know we talk about the 1.5 degrees centigrade, but we're quite used to extreme heat here. And one of the points the Red Sea Global Development Company made was that the coral that they cultivate in the Red Sea can withstand much higher temperatures, which of course stands to reason given what I just said. And if that coral could be used where other coral is being bleached, where other coral is in decline and decay, then of course you can think more broadly about how to help other countries with adaptation and ecosystem restoration. If I just move away from COP28 and climate change, climate action and climate emergency, and just try to put into context what GCC Board Directors Institute is trying to do. I, by background, as was said, essentially have a financial background. And it was also said earlier that if you think about the sort of reporting that we're expected to do, whether in the private or public sector to stakeholders, it's essentially financial reporting. And as was also said, increasingly there's a convergence between extra financial or non-financial reporting around sustainability. And what's incredible, a bit like AI, my only reference to AI, is just how quickly how things are happening in terms of what's expected from a stakeholder point of view, as opposed to from a corporate point of view. I've spent my whole career working with large corporations, both private and public sector, advising corporations, taking corporations public, so taking public money, and then essentially reporting from a financial point of view. And even when I left my last corporate role, which was just over a decade ago in Singapore, the idea of reporting extra financially or non-financially just didn't really seem to register. And typically, if you had investor meetings, you wouldn't be asked on such factors. You'd be asked purely on the financials. By the time I left the UK, which was just over 5 years ago, you were beginning to get questions on some of the environmental, social, and governance factors. I know Peter doesn't like the acronym, but it's definitely being used. And whether companies like it or not, of course, stakeholders, particularly providers of finance, expect you to at least have a conversation or an idea around some of these other factors, extra financial factors, as I described them. And roll forward to today, in the Middle East, there is increasingly a view to mandating such reporting because, as was already said, the convergence between such non-financial reporting and financial reporting, which we're very used to, should be fairly logical and very, very possible. But of course, it takes time. And I think one of the points I'd like to leave you with, particularly thinking of the countries in the Caribbean, is one of the advantages we have as being so-called frontier or emerging markets is we can leapfrog, we can avoid some of the errors of developed markets, just as Professor Garratt suggested in his opening remarks. And we can do it ground up, as opposed to assuming, as Peter said, that, you know, there's a one-size-fits-all best practice and you can export it to the Middle East or you can export it to the Caribbean and assume everything will be great and dandy for all the stakeholders. Clearly, that's not the case. And I think when you are on the ground, when you're actually in frontier and emerging markets, which I've generally been in for most of my career, you recognize the differences, you recognize all the things that can be done and the way that they can be done. And it's very encouraging, as I said, whether from a governmental or a top-down point of view with big events like the COP conferences, or indeed whether ground up from an enterprise point of view, just picking up on that key word from Professor Garratt, that business, whether private or public sectors, can take a view on sustainability, can be responsible, and I think can do good by more stakeholders than just the ones that I'm used to and just the ones I mentioned on the financial side. And I think we only need cast our minds back to the global pandemic and realize just how important we are as employees, as employers, just how important customers are, just how important it was to be led very, very effectively, particularly in the Middle East. So, for example, the UAE was one of the first markets to open up within 3 to 4 months because it had to, but it was very top-down led, very government-led. All the programs that supported the opening up of the economy worked remarkably well. Civil society backed that up. Everyone towed the line, behaved in a proper fashion so that we could get on with our lives pretty early on in 2020. So we were all back to work and doing what we were normally doing within, as I said, 3 to 4 months. So both a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach, which I've also seen, as Professor Garratt suggested, in other economies in Asia, for example, Singapore, where I spent 14 years, a country with no natural resources other than its people and the deepest seaport in the world, but a country and an economy that has built a critical mass, has been able to do it in a very Singapore Inc. way, and is a very highly successful example of can do. And Professor Garratt also mentioned, you know, I mean, that top-down as well as I mentioned, bottom-up approach to some of the big issues that we face, whether climate emergency or trying to be responsible and sustainable businesses. I think I'll stop there, Camille, because, as I said, we followed 2 very large main courses. Consider my comments as a little roundup and perspective from the Middle East, and very, very happy to, of course, entertain questions from you or indeed the audience. Thank you.
Well, I think that was excellent Guyanese dessert. And the first thing we need to understand is how to get that coral, because we are losing our corals here in the Caribbean. And without the coral, we have no beaches. And without the beaches, our tourism will be heavily impacted. And if tourism is impacted, many of our economies tank. So, Kamla, we need to have a little action plan coming out of this International Learning Network today. And the first action is to go to John to get the coral that can deal with the hot seas that are being produced that we have to be facing now. And what we need to also come out of this meeting today with is almost a little action plan that we can put to our respective governments. Because unfortunately, John, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And for all the business persons gathered here today, our businesses will be affected. If you have a hotel and you have no beach, you're going to be in problems. So the reality is, it is in our interest to understand everything that has been said today, and then to pull the strands together into a proper action plan, which in fact is governance, because we are dealing with the environmental impact and the social impact, which is equaling the corporate governance. So no, John, do not in any way minimize your contribution to our conversation today. Now, in relation to IFRS, and I will just kick off with the questions. Are you aware in the Middle East of the 2 new IFRS sustainability standards?
They talk about leapfrogging, and of course, by background, I've been producing financial reports as a banker, as an investor relations officer for a long, long time. And it's funny thinking about where we are, because as I said, as recently as 5-6 years ago when I left the UK, typically in an investor meeting, you wouldn't have featured very much in terms of extra financial or ESG type questions, whereas today, of course, most of the conversations are going to be around extra financial factors. In the Middle East, they've been very patient, just as they were in Singapore. And I remember being asked to produce an annual report just before I left my last corporate employer, which was the Singapore Exchange. And there was a framework called the Global Reporting Initiative, which you'll be familiar with. And it was sort of used, but not used widely. I remember producing the report, taking the results to my chairman, who was a Singaporean, and he looked at the rating and said, John, we don't do C+ in Singapore. You'll have to go away and make sure you do a better job. To which I was very pleased to be able to say, well, actually, I'm leaving, so you'll have to get the A+ yourself. Of course, Singapore will always be A+, and within the next 5 to 10 years, they didn't just get to that level. They also mandated the reporting, and they were one of the first markets to mandate sustainability reporting. And as I mentioned, what's interesting in the Middle East is there's similar views as to trying to push the market along from a top-down point of view. But I think if you think of it from a corporate point of view, as was also mentioned earlier in the discussion, it's very, very difficult to just transplant and expect business which has been running sensibly, profitably, hopefully responsibly and sustainably for a long time to suddenly change tack and do new things and other things. So I think while I haven't answered your question directly, we're at a very, very early stage of thinking what's the best approach to take. And I know the exchanges very well because of my background. I used to work at an exchange. And increasingly, we're finding that the regulators are trying to take a more top-down view because they're not probably confident that companies will respond quickly enough. And ultimately, it comes down to that competition for attention of the stakeholders and potentially, of course, competition for capital, as I know so well. So I think we're at the early stages, and I wouldn't describe any of the Middle Eastern markets as particularly ready or able to respond to what you just asked.
John, could I just jump in there, because the Saudi Arabian Stock Exchange, the TADL, has put together some really good guidance on kind of how you report non-financial information. And that might be something, it's online in English, so you can have a look at it. But I actually found that really useful, not just when I've been working in the Gulf, but to actually look at as a way of how might you approach if you're going to be reporting, as Dionne said, tell people about this. So to me, that, having traveled other parts of the world, was very good. As you say, it's a pity not many companies are yet following it, but it is there as a really good piece of guidance. So that might be something people might.
Good for Alison, and good to see you.
Yes, we have to catch up at some stage. Yeah.
So here at CCGI, we didn't tell you, but this is where friends meet to catch up.
Yes.
Alison, thank you for joining in. And at this point, I'm going to invite anybody who has questions or comments. And June, you put a comment in the chat. Could you just share with us what you were saying?
I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, left at an early age and has been living in Canada. I've spearheaded 2 companies on corporate governance. builds frameworks, and I am focusing mainly now on DEI, ESG, and sustainability. I'm a bit new to ESG, but I visited the UN office in Rome in December, and there are a lot of free learning from their website, which I'll forward to Kamala, that people can learn on how to implement the 17 SDGs. And while I know in the Caribbean, things are a little bit slower, I think it's a good pace for people to become more aware of really what we should be doing. And we had some great speakers and knowledge here today. I myself learned about a bit more on AI. I've been going to lots of AI sessions. It's a bit scary. I learned recently about perplexability AI. And I think this organization is doing a great job in, running these sessions and educating people as to how best the Caribbean could adapt to all the changing environments in terms of sustainability, ESG reporting, and good corporate governance practice. I myself, a lot of my clients, I've just launched my own business. I am in the mining industry, so now I need to learn a lot on ESG. More than I thought I would. I do have a good person in London, England, who is spearheaded that. And I would be sharing, I want to help the Caribbean people. I'm from there. So I'm going to be collaborating with Kamala on anything that I have new and sending it out to the committee that she can share to people. In terms of good sustainable governance and practices, I've done from, benchmarking, evaluations, policies, mandates, charters, basically everything with the board and how boards can align their fiduciary duties and how they can tie in DEI with their strategy. And now, as one of the professors rightly said, ESG is not something that people have been taking, seriously, but now there's a lot of legislation for listed companies, for instance, on TSX, that they have to. And in terms of representation for women, in 2017, the TSX brought out legislation that all TSX listed and publicly traded companies incorporated under the CBCA, they must have a goal for their representation. And I was recently doing some policies for a smaller company, and he basically said to me, "Why are you putting a target?" And I said to him, "Well, it's good governance practice. However, we don't need to have a target, but we can reword the policy." And he agreed to that. And, I thought all these steps can help. And I really do want to help the Caribbean people. That's my people, with all the knowledge that I have.
Yeah, June, and we're going to take you up on that right away. Do you happen to have either an AI policy or an ESG policy that you can share? We're looking for those.
I do have ESG. So ESG policy is basically on human rights, the environmental. If you have like a stakeholder or anything to do with, like for me, I had to incorporate a water management, supply chain management into it. And how it's basically done, it's those 4 policies that fall under the umbrella of ESG. And a lot of companies have done, like where they work, they would put a picture, we care about our people, and then they'll have the policy listed. So basically, that's how it's done so far from what I've seen. I've just done 2 ESG policy, basically with 4 policies under the umbrellas under it, so which I can send to you.
Right, we would really appreciate that. And just for other persons who are online, the whole point of fiduciary responsibility, I put it to you that it is now part of your fiduciary responsibility as a director or as a senior executive to understand the developments in this space, both the AI space and the ESG space, and to ensure that you are doing as Dr. Crow said, and at your board meetings, you are leaving that white space in your agenda where you can talk about these issues and how it is that your entity ought to deal with these new and emerging trends. Navin, you were going to say something. Yes, your hand is up. Please.
Yes. Hi, thank you. And my apologies that I didn't hear things as I was putting my headphones on. I didn't mean to cut across June so rudely. So I am trying to do something in this space right now. So I'm working on a deep tech climate finance project, essentially. It's based kind of when you're innovating in the Caribbean, when you're looking for VC interest, and as many VCs would know, they don't really take you very seriously. So you have to validate it at certain institutions. So I've had to go to the EU, the European Institute for Technology has a thing called Climate Launchpad. So I had to participate in that. So I was supposed to get the most innovative ideas in the world for business in the climate space. So I came second in the continent here. Maybe top 10 anywhere. I don't know. They didn't have a global finals, but I would have been in global finals, but they didn't have it this year. So that, and I have London VC interest. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm trying to get any opportunities where in the Caribbean, they have the most advanced adoption for CBDCs, which is coming or is here with mangroves and establishing baseline data. But I'm trying to create essentially a generative blue carbon AI bank, right? So my team is partners between the UK and here in the Caribbean. It's still building it out in talks like grant funding, all this kind of stuff. But I think I'm still, because where the point is can we scale the application to frameworks? Since we're using sort of SPVs and all that, applying governance frameworks, not just climate change assessments for baseline, they're going to establish baseline data for mangroves, all that sort of stuff, to do it at a scale that a bunch of humans can't, right? But it's a deep tech idea, which is basically to see how can we develop technology to learn to adjacent market opportunities. But mangroves is where I'm starting out at. And I do think in the Caribbean there's opportunity there, because we're one of the first few, well, we're doing some good research in terms of establishing baseline data for carbon storage in mangroves, but also will lead to the adoption of the CBDCs. There may be UX, UI problems, all that kind of stuff, but I don't really care about that, because what I care about is that it's just enough to give me proof of concept. It's like a bunch of little petri dishes we are in the Caribbean, but for some reason in the Caribbean, we don't really see the opportunity for innovating in these petri dishes, but that hopefully I can use that to my advantage. So I'm hoping that when I hit enter here, and if my profile comes up, that you'll connect with me, and if you have any questions to me, don't ask it here. That we can connect offline and we can have a nice little chat after. Yeah.
All right.
I'm all about learning. So yeah.
No, yes. And one of the points Dionne made so powerfully was that we need to use the technology to help to solve the problems.
Yeah.
So you are playing in that space.
Yeah, I should add, what I've done is I want to do it in a kind of smart way. So I did go back to Cambridge, and they should be recruiting someone who just did his PhD on this thing, instead of taking hardwiring the financial metrics in sustainability metrics in a hardwired space. And I could codify that in platforms to scale applicability, right? So that's kind of how we do, because we're trying to get away from the greenwashing, and that's the value proposition we could offer.
We can discuss that further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And we have your contacts.
Great.
Alison, I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you, Camille. I think one of the most worrying things that I kind of heard was what Peter was talking about, which is that the data you put into the platforms that you're looking at, as far as AI is concerned, gives you the result. So if you put in the wrong data, you get the wrong result. And I think, you know, the conversations Bob has been having around, you know, definitions of what governance means. I was interested that Peter said we have a definition of governance, because my experience traveling across the globe is we have anything but. And I've always pushed governance as being culture, and actually, you know, how do you make things effective, that your governance tools, the laws, the regulations, standards and codes that have been put in place, how do you make those operate? And I was a bit shocked when I came back to the UK to find what to me was really this old-fashioned kind of thought process that governance is actually, you know, controlling, directing, and you're still very much, the focus seems to be on regulation. And, you know, I agree with Bob. I was a bit disappointed that the new code didn't embrace more some of what the OECD has been putting out around relationships and, you know, stakeholder engagement. And it just worries me that if people start applying AI to governance, what are they going to be using as, you know, to put into the platform? Because we could then end up with more problems if we're not careful. I mean, we've all been talking about sustainability. I know when I hear somebody use that word in the boardroom, the first question I ask is, what are you talking about? Are you talking about sustainability of the organization, or are you talking about sustainability of the planet? And many people will say back at me, but they're the same thing. And I said, no, they're not at all. They can be very, very different things. And I think, you know, the kind of bringing in of the terminology ESG in itself. You go to parts of Africa, the Middle East, the G is part, you know, sorry, the E and the S are part of the G, but in the US, they're separate. So you know, we've lots of terminology, lots of approaches, lots of definitions that are going around that, you know, if they go into the AI in the wrong way, could cause lots of problems and companies lots of problems in actually achieving what's important, which is the other part of what we've been talking about tonight, you know, engagement in climate change or engagement in social issues, you know, that companies really need to be looking at if they are going to be sustainable in the long term. So I think, you know, how we get regulators, how we get companies, how we get boards to really think about what is governance, which to me is the DNA of an organization, how an organization is running. So it's not, do we do governance or not? We do governance. It's just, do we do it well or do we do it badly? That to me it should really be more the conversation.
Excellent thought. Peter, could you weigh in?
Alison, really, really good wide swathe of stuff. I'm going to issue one, and I'll call it a correction, but one clarification, and that is that, the question that I'm asked the most often around the world is, what is corporate governance? So I don't think it's settled, right? I heard you say that you thought I said it was settled, and I'm not asserting that. I've got a view as to what it is, and it's based on the Greek etymology of the word, and it comes through Richard Eales and Sir Adrian Cadbury, and I think it's entirely appropriate in that directing and controlling, right? So directing is about performance. Where are we going? And that needs to be in the context of the big picture, because boards don't exist without a company, and a company doesn't exist without an market ecosystem society. So all of those layers are there, but governance for me is what happens in the boardroom, and it doesn't exist outside the boardroom. Now that's controversial, but the backup is this: it's like a sports game. The rules of the game are not the game. The score at the end, so if you bring that back into corporate, the annual report, that's not the game either. The game is as played on the field or the court or wherever, and that's in the boardroom. The difficulty we've got, and the other speakers have made the point incredibly well and far better than I can, is that we've got directors completely asleep. Okay, so I've said it now, and I know it's being recorded, but I think our directors are asleep. We've lulled ourselves, and I think the directors' institutes around the world are complicit, and the regulators as well, that we think we can comply our way to performance. We think we can comply our way to sustainability. I'm sorry, it's about as realistic as standing in a bucket and then expecting to lift it while we're standing in it. What we need to do is to take those definitions and learn how to apply them in the way that we've been talking about, which is what is that future that we've still got a company? What is that future that we've still got that economic wealth creation engine in the context and in balance with the government? Because the government's job is to set rules. And society and community. So that's about all the social exchange, and how do those three parts fit together to get a better result? The use of technology in the problem, yep, absolutely, but we need to do it well. And I think that at the moment, I pointed to the hype curve. We've got a lot of people trying to make a lot of money on ESG, sustainability, DEI, and others. And, I get flown around the world by people who have fundamentally got one question. And that question is all about the basics. How do we get a group of men and women sitting in a boardroom, having actively thought about what's going on in the big picture, and making smart decisions, so we've still got a company in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and we can make lots of economic wealth on the way through, and we're not stuffing up the environment and we're not stuffing up people. That's where we need to get to. I've got views on how to do that, and others have as well, and we've all got different views, and I think that's a healthy thing, because if I may, a lot of my work sits in private companies, family businesses. I was in Africa late last year, and I took a chance with this group, capable directors, started talking about sustainability. They were on, mentioned ESG, they all clammed up, not interested. They know they've got a view as to what it is, and they don't like it. They just clammed up on me. I had to get them back. So I had to take the word and put it over there somewhere. So these just some of the, this is far from straightforward. And it's just far from straightforward. I'll stop there.
And, Peter, you've made a very valid point. And where we are in the Caribbean, a lot of persons just see directors as a compliance issue. In order to form your company, you have to have these directors. And directors themselves don't truly understand what is required. And when you talk about the time that you have to devote, did you mention something about 1 day a week? Because I know Prof Garratt also.
No. Let me clarify.
Yeah.
The recommendation that I make for any company that is substantive, so that is they've got the practices of governance are starting to emerge in terms of, the principles around setting direction and overseeing leadership and culture, holding management to account and providing an account to external stakeholders. That's set, because other 4 key principles are 1 week per board per month, regardless of how many meetings you've got in a year, whether it's monthly or quarterly. Now, the speakers on this call are pretty good. We know what we're talking about, okay? Without wishing to sound arrogant or anything like that, okay? Just to be very clear. I would spend 20 hours a week reading just to keep up, and I'm reading philosophy and all sorts, and it's difficult to keep up. One of the things I don't read is the law. I explicitly leave the law aside, because we pay lawyers to do that, so I don't need to worry about it. And so that's one of the things that we need to work our way through. But to your point, we've got a generation of older directors, men and women, who think they can comply their way. And I'd offer a comment that a lot of that comes out of the US, which is a rules-based society. It's a view. And then we've got people that are well advanced in their careers, but they're not towards the end. So these are your 50-somethings and 60-somethings. They're saying, there's more to it. And then you've got the younger idealist type people that might lack the maturity and wisdom. So you've got a complicated soup. I think, Alison, you called it a definition soup. We want diversity for different perspectives, but at the same time, we need alignment when we're making decisions. So there's a lot to consider. And I'm intentionally posing more questions than answers. I think if we come with answers without thinking really deeply about these things, we run the risk of standing up houses of cards.
Mm-hmm. All right. And we're coming to you, Jude, because we're getting to the end. But I just want to say, Peter, that this whole concept of being a director, and the responsibilities, I fear that in the Caribbean, we really have not begun to drill down. And certainly the type of time that you're talking about, companies are not prepared to pay directors for spending that kind of time.
It's not about, we've got to take time off the table. It's, time is an input. What we need to think about is, are we called, do we want to govern as an individual? And if we do, then we say, this is the amount of income that I can expect to earn as a company director. Since I've been away, which is now 2 days, I've had 3 hours on calls back home because we're dealing with some problems with one of the companies that I'm associated with. I didn't plan any of that. And so it's not about time, it's about contribution. And this goes to Bob's point around the number of duties that directors can recall when they're posed a question. And he'll tell us the answer from his research. So these are big things. We need directors' institutes to get to really stiffen up their accountability. It's not about collecting members. It's about supporting directors to really get their head around this role. We do it with leadership, institutes of strategic leadership all over the place, institutes of management all over the place. And yet when we become a director, we think that training's optional. What's all that about?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sorry, they're reasonably strong views and they've taken us off in a little way, but you asked the question.
No, that's one of the issues that we are grappling with here. When you sign up to be a director, what truly are you signing up for? Jude.
A lot of people think it's just a resume filler, and realistically, we just pull at people who are within the environment, but we don't look at the skill set that they need to have for these posts to be able to deliver at the level that they ought to deliver.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's one thing to say that it's not about the earning, but very often, especially when you have younger persons and we're looking for diversity on boards, if it is not somebody who is just, independently wealthy and wanting to fill their time, they're going to be looking at, what am I going to earn in exchange for all the time I really need to spend? And that happens also with government boards, but with government boards, quite often it's voluntary. So, you make that commitment. But with private sector boards now, let's just say that your comments are things that are making us realize, well, we have realized before. And as I said, Prof Garratt also made this point in his book, The Fish Rots from His Head. It said about the time, the fact that once you have signed up as a director, you are a director 24/7, and what is required of you in terms of commitment and time. And I think it's something that we're still grappling with here in the Caribbean. Let me just go to Jude to close us off on his last, what I hope is a question.
Yes, yes. Good day to everybody. My name is Jude Bernard. I have a question for Dr. Chamberlain, right? Dr. Chamberlain, you had mentioned a list of action items that we should strive to achieve, two of which are reducing energy consumption and the better use of technologies, right? Now, I would like to know what are some workarounds or recommendations you would have to sustain or maintain sustainability, bearing in mind most companies' consideration for sustainability, which is like, the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. And then you have corporate governance, you have people, processes, you have performance and purpose, which is 4 Ps. Now, if we are to implement the use of technology, what are some of the workarounds given the negative greenhouse gas effect it would have? Because really and truly, while our recommendation it would have been to everybody's, stay home, use technology, have meetings online, we have all these systems in place and everything. And it's good because you don't have all that, reduces CO2 emission. You don't have all those people moving back and forth on the road and stuff like that. And it also helps reduce cleaning costs, right? And then the cost of chemicals used to clean buildings and facilities. So it's excellent. But then now you have 10 people home using air conditions, which is even worse and adds a huge amount to the greenhouse gas effect. You have to utilizing electricity and all these different kind of things. So it goes against reducing energy consumption, right? So how would you treat in dealing with cases like these?
Again, it's not one size fits all, and we have to look at the individual economies. I can tell you that in Belize, where I live, for instance, air conditioning is far and few between. And I can tell you that in England, Professor Barratt can probably tell you that the air conditioning in homes are far and few between as well. So it adds to the context of where you are in terms of how you look at it and how you can do that. And so you're very right in terms of it's not a one size fits all, and neither am I saying that we're supposed to go sit in an outhouse on a compost toilet and use corn cobs. I'm just saying that we have to have a balanced view to how we handle it and according to our individual environments and according to how it works best for our societies. So pardon me, but I'm actually using my Belizean reference where we do not have that. However, there are the other ways, and we're never, I can't say never, but I do hand holding for investors, and we're not looking that we're not going to be able to move. I mean, I do travel, I do flights, I do all of these things, but we have to come up to an area where we do our best to contribute every single day, whether it be just one tiny crack. And like I tell everybody, water boils at 212 and it is hot at 211, but at 212 it can roll a locomotive, it can do many things. So we have to make these decisions based on what's best for us, what's best for environment, how it works. Now, from what we've been talking about here today, I'm thinking on my investor perspective, I'm going to have to advocate to my government to push more LEEDs certification for buildings and investors within our country, because that makes sense. I don't know if it was John Gollifer or Peter Crow that mentioned something to that effect, but these are all thought evoking, and I want us to not take everything that we walk away here and say it's ingrained and it has to be exactly the way we say it, but take what works, one starfish at a time, one event, one effort that you make can make a difference, and just shifting the way that we behave, because the earth is ours and we can make that difference, and we cannot avoid technology like AI. But the reality is that there will always be compelling evidence, like you brought about just now, Mr. Bernard, in terms of how it affects. I'm not saying that you follow everything that I say in my it's really thought-provoking for you to decide what works, what could make that impact, because it's very easy to say what will not work and how it will not work within our environments. But it is a lot easier to just make natural decisions to do better for this earth and this planet, which we're a part of. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think I will just adopt what you said, say I concur, and take that as my closing commentary. I want to thank John, Peter, and Dionne for giving so freely of your knowledge and your expertise. And at this point in time, I'm going to hand back to Kamala. Thank you all so very much.